Thank you all for joining us today. We're super excited about this opportunity to talk with you about some important work that we've been engaged in with the Community College Baccalaureate Association and Bragg and Associates. I'm just going to jump in. I see that we still are adding a few participants, but hopefully we can get going and welcome folks as they join us. I am Debra Bragg. I am president of Bragg and Associates, that is the official research partner to the Community College Baccalaureate Association. My group has been doing this work for a few years, and we're very happy to collaborate with Dr. Angela Kersenbrock and her amazing team at CCBA. They're the folks who've been putting together this information and really welcome you to be part of this today. We do think we have we're excited to share it with you. We're going to focus today on the policies and strategies that advance baccalaureate attainment for community college students. And we know that many of you probably translate that into transfer. And transfer is an important part of what we'll be talking about today. But we're actually talking about much more. We're talking about the various ways that community college students can secure bachelor's degrees and the development of new ways to help students succeed in securing those degrees. So today's session is going to kick off with some incredible national research on baccalaureate attainment that we're so excited to hear from Nicole Smith. We'll then talk about a little bit of our research. I'm thrilled to be here with Tim Harmon, who's a colleague and friend. We'll be sharing with you some of our findings from the Great Lakes states on community college baccalaureate attainment. And then we're going to open it up under the leadership of Angela Kersenbrock to talk to a panel of state and institutional leaders from the Great Lakes states to talk about what this looks like and what they're doing. Before we dive in, I'd like to share just a few tips. First, please mute yourself to avoid any advertent noise, and also please participate. And we'd like you to participate by putting your questions or comments in the chat, and the CCBA team will be monitoring those questions and alerting the speaker or Dr. Kersenbrock to the questions that are there. So we do think this can be and should be interactive. So we welcome you and hope that you will participate in that way. So let's just get going. I am very pleased to introduce our first speaker, who will provide an important framing for today's webinar, our virtual convening. We are so pleased that Emily Goldman is kicking off today's convening. She is a program officer at the Joyce Foundation. Excited that the Joyce Foundation has supported this work. A lot of the research and development that we've been doing on community college has really been supported by Joyce for a number of years, and we're very grateful. Emily has extensive experience in higher education policy, as she was the lead policy director for the Partnership for College Completion here in Illinois. And under her leadership and continuing efforts of the partnership, we're seeing some major work around higher education finance reform. And I suspect we'll hear a little bit more from our Illinois state leaders about that. There's so much I can tell you about Emily. I will keep it short, Emily. I will say, though, she's a graduate of Indiana University, and she lived in Indiana, grew up there, and now lives in Chicago, which I live in Chicago, so I'm thrilled that Emily is a neighbor. She also got her law degree. She is a lawyer from Loyola University's Chicago's Law School. So with that, Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deb. That was a very kind introduction, and appreciate all the work that you're doing. So I'll kick us off with a few remarks. I mean, as I think first I'll introduce Joyce briefly. I think as many of you know, the Joyce Foundation invests in public policies and strategies to advance racial equity and economic mobility for the next generation across the Great Lakes. So in every state represented here. I lead the foundation's post-secondary success portfolio, which recognizes that a post-secondary degree is the surest path to social and economic mobility. And therefore, we strive to eliminate barriers to college access and success, particularly for students of color and students from low-income households. In that work, we support policy and research that aims to improve completion rates, both at two-year colleges and at four-year colleges. But we know, as well as everybody on this call does, that most students who enroll in a community college aspire to earn a bachelor's degree. So at Joyce, when we think about completion, we think about it through a racial equity and economic mobility lens and with the student's end goal in mind. And the good news is that over this last decade, we've seen a lot of experimentation aimed at improving transfer and bachelor's degree attainment more broadly. At Joyce, we've supported direct admissions policy across several states in the region, including implementation in Minnesota and a clearinghouse in Ohio to help students who have institutional debt access their transcripts, re-enroll, and then upon completion, get that debt forgiven. And then as transfer bubbles up as a top priority for many states and the federal leaders, we're seeing more university centers on community colleges pop up, more robust 2+2 agreements, and guaranteed admissions policies across the country. These innovations are particularly important now in the aftermath of the affirmative action decision, which threatens college access for students of color. And while we made some progress in transfer and bachelor degree attainment broadly, none of these things are a silver bullet. Nationally, only 62% of first-time full-time students earn a bachelor's degree in 6 years, and we have stagnant disparities in college access, transfer, and degree attainment across race and income. So this leaves us with both a challenge and an opportunity. A challenge to give these policies that we've already described, the time and the space to take root and to study and scale the practices that are working, and an opportunity, as Deb alluded to earlier, to think beyond the current models and pathways that exist to help students earn a bachelor's degree. In Illinois, for example, which you might hear about later, they're considering what a direct admissions policy for transfer could look like and how they could integrate cost and financial aid data as part of that direct admissions letter to students. I think across every please correct me if I'm wrong, every state in the region, they're at various stages of considering or implementing community college baccalaureate degrees. And as mentioned earlier, evidence suggests that when done well, CCBs can play an integral role in expanding access to affordable, high-quality bachelor's degrees in areas where there's high workforce demand, like IT and healthcare and advanced manufacturing, and limited access to four-year options. CCBs expand access for students who aren't and likely never will be in that transfer pathway. They're often, seeking economic security for themselves and their families, but they're unlikely to pursue a four-year degree unless it's in their backyard. They're often older, taking care of aging family, taking care of children, more likely to be place-based, and often too far from a public university. As you'll hear from Dr. Bragg and Tim Harmon in a bit, CCBs are really one part of a broader transfer and bachelor degree attainment ecosystem, and one that holds a lot of promise. I'll just kind of end by saying today's conversation is just really important. I mean, we're seeing at Joyce, and I'm sure in your own, wherever you sit, states are grappling with workforce shortages, with college enrollment declines, and increasingly battling the skepticism about the value of higher education. And so we have an opportunity in this region to really set a standard for the country and show what happens when a whole region is dedicated to helping its students earn affordable, and high quality degrees. I'm honored to be just a small part of today's conversation and able to support CCBA and many of the folks on this call and this work. And I'm excited to see really how this region can come together, lean in this moment to help students achieve their education and career goals. So with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's really going to share the good stuff and highlight why we're focused on bachelor degree attainment today. Dr. Nicole Smith, she's a research professor and chief economist at Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, where she leads the center's econometric and methodological. I practiced this word, Nicole, I practiced it over and over again and I still mess it up. Methodological work. Dr. Smith developed a framework that forms the underlying methodology for a report that projects education demand for occupations in the U.S. economy through 2030. And today she'll be sharing that research with us to help set the stage for today's conversation. It's an honor to introduce you, and you can take it from here.
Okay, good. So good day, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. And Emily, the methodological work is still a mouthful for me, even though I spent so much time doing it. I always tell some of my students and other colleagues that I work with that a better way to describe this is we make very intelligent guess of what the future of the economy is, and it is indeed a guess because there's so many moving parts that anything can happen to actually change the direction of that pathway. But I think that our guess is as good as any because we try to incorporate as much information as we can about the future. So it's again really a pleasure to be here. So many familiar faces, and I think it's interesting that Joyce also preceded my talk because Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, we've had a long relationship with the Joyce Foundation as well, and they've spent so much time supporting the research that we do. So I'm really happy that I was a part of this conversation. So what are we going to talk about today? The future of BAs and projecting jobs and opportunities through 2031. And you would see that the conversation started by Emily talking about 2030. And then this says 2031, and now we have research to 2032. We sort of keep moving this, so it's a rolling amount of work. So if you have an interest, you should go to our website and sometimes see what the updates look like as new information becomes available. So here's some of the summary. Post-secondary education and training has taken on an increasingly important role in career preparation for the United States. And as Debra said earlier, more and more today, we realize that the BA degree has become the pathway towards middle skill opportunity and middle skill jobs in America. Having a college credential is both valuable in the labor market and very expensive, and much of the burden falls directly on students and families. Too many young adults take on significant college debt only to be left struggling and not able to get a good job. Post-secondary education and training beyond high school has become the sole arbiter of economic mobility in America. And our research shows that close to 72% of all jobs will require some type of post-secondary education and training by 2031, and that's up from 68%. So we see this rise, we see this movement, and there's many reasons for it. Everyone thinks it's just AI and it's just artificial intelligence and generative AI. That's part of it. But this type of movement, this type of growth has been ongoing for the past 40 years. And it will continue to grow as the types of jobs, the skills, the certifications required for these jobs continues to change in that way. College degrees have come under fire. Oh, I'm sorry, it's moving too quickly. Has come under fire from many directions. And it's mostly due to rising costs of tuition and dubious long-run returns to investment. But despite the naysayers, college grads tend to earn a substantial wage premium in the labor market. So we know that there's lots of people every day we open the newspaper, someone's going to say, college degrees aren't worth it. We don't need these degrees anymore. But sometimes you have to listen to the subtext because they know that we still need the degrees. They're just trying to tell you who ought to get access to those degrees and which students ought to get access to those degrees. Because most of the times when they say you don't need a degree, they don't mean themselves or their children, but they mean other people. So I want to point you to the two reports that will inform most of the discussion today. It's called After Everything, Projections of Jobs, Education, and Training Requirements through 2031. These reports are available on our website at Georgetown Center in Education and the Workforce. We do it nationally on the left, and we have a state-by-state breakdown and analysis by education, by training, by our projections of jobs. We sort of do it for newly created jobs as well as jobs from retirement as people retire. For those of you that know, our director, Tony Carnevale, recently retired. We've been sort of waiting and asking him for quite some time. I mean, when he turned 60, we're like, are you going to retire? Of course not. Don't ask me that. And then there was 62, and then there was 65, and then there was 70, and then there was 75. And for a while, we thought he wasn't going to retire at all, in keeping with what's been going on with many of our baby boomers who have extended their retirement time and extended their retirement age and are doing so quite successfully in the labor market. So this report is talking about a little bit about what that means, those delayed retirements, and what that means for incoming cohorts and job opportunities as well. So here's a chart that tends to be one of our premier charts for the report, and it tells us what the distribution of jobs by education level would look like, not only in our base year, which was 2021, but a projection year of 2031, and comparing that to 1983. We actually have some comparisons that go back to the 1990s as well, and the 1970s. But if you point yourself, if you look only at your color scheme, I would like for you to look at the blues and then the yellows and the reds. And what we see is the blues have been continuously increasing in terms of its share of all jobs. And we find that by 2031, 26% of all jobs, more than a quarter of every single job in the United States economy, is going to require a bachelor's degree. And 16% of them will require a graduate degree. That's PhDs and master's degrees. It's a full 16%. And of all of the changes that we observe, the biggest, most significant changes, in my opinion, are at the bottom of this distribution, which is people who don't have a high school diploma. They have dropped drastically, 32 to 10 to 6%. And most of that has to do with the changing nature of jobs in the US economy, the rise and fall of manufacturing. And I'm always careful about talking about a fall of manufacturing because manufacturing still contributes significantly to GDP of this country. What has changed is the number of people who are required to work in manufacturing as manufacturing became increasingly automated and increasingly mechanized. So we needed less and less people and more machines. And so each human being in manufacturing today contributes about $300,000 to the GDP of manufacturing for the nation, compared to one person 30 years ago contributing about $100,000. So people today, each manufacturing worker is 3 times as productive as he was 40 years ago, and we have less manufacturing workers and less opportunity for people who try to get into that industry. But it has declined the number of workers in that sector. And as a result, the difficulty to get a job if you don't have a high school diploma has increased substantially, and only 6% of the jobs available in the future will be available for people who don't have a high school diploma. But the next significant change to me is the bachelor's degree. We talk about this all the time. Moving from 11 to 22%, and from 22 to 26%, 4 percentage point increase in just 10 years. And that is the biggest jump of any of the sectors. We have some college, no degree, 19 to 16 fall, but definitely moving from 22 to 26 is substantial. And we have to respond to that by making sure that we continue to graduate as many people as possible. And the National Student Clearinghouse for the last 4 or 5 years has published data that speaks to the fact that we have declining levels of enrollment in bachelor's degrees. And a lot of us think that this has to do with COVID. But their numbers actually started in 2016 when they were showing us information on declining enrollment numbers. And just today, the Bureau of Labor Statistics published a report that speaks to what's been happening with the high school graduating class of 2023. And they break it by race, ethnicity, and they compare it to what's happening in the labor force. And again, just today, the BLS is showing us that enrollment is on the decline. The percentage of our high school graduating class by race, ethnicity that's enrolling in college is on the decline. So moving on here. And here we go. I'm not sure why my screen did that, but I'm going to go back to slideshow. So I think this chart is pretty interesting, because what we do here is we take the entire US economy and we divide it by broad occupational degrees and broad occupational classifications and education level. So education is predominantly highly educated. That should come as no surprise, right? Our teachers need bachelor's degrees and above. And STEM jobs, no surprise either. There's a large proportion of people BA and above. Community service and arts occupations, managerial and professionals, healthcare professionals, no one should be surprised that the majority of those jobs require a bachelor's degree and above. But here's what's interesting. What's interesting for this conversation is that even the blue collar occupations, the skills trades occupations, sales and office support, food and personal services, healthcare support, and blue collar, we have increasing proportions of those occupations that require a bachelor's degree. And what we also know is that the workers that are at the top of the wage food chain in these occupations are the ones that have a bachelor's degree and above. So we have an entire economy. We took the entire economy and we're dividing it by all of the broad occupational classifications, and you found the BA has infiltrated all of these jobs. And even those jobs that in the traditional sense was reserved for blue collar and skills trade, was reserved for the middle of the road, we have increasing numbers of people who need a bachelor's degree to be successful in those jobs. I want to point us to what this means by volume, because blue collar, sales and office support, food and personal services, and healthcare support by volume have the largest number of jobs in the United States economy, right? So if I look at the number of jobs now, and not just the distribution by education, it also paints a story about the value of a bachelor's degree. It paints a story about how important the bachelor's degree is across the economy, in not just the distribution, because if we have a high distribution in an occupation that doesn't have so many jobs in there, it doesn't matter. But we have a high distribution of bachelor's jobs in sales and office, which is a big contributor, and blue collar, which is a big contributor, and food and personal services, and in healthcare support, as well as the traditional ones that we expect. This particular chart is telling us about the wage distribution and earnings. So here we have information which, depending on what side of whether you're in the blue corner or in the red corner, you can use this information to your advantage and disadvantage, because here's what it says. It says that every single education level has a distribution of earnings. So if you're a high school dropout, a high school diploma, AA, BA, master's, there's a range that you would potentially earn. And a lot of people use this to say, look at this. Some BAs are only earning, over a lifetime, 1.9 million, and that's not enough. And you have some AAs that can earn up to 2.9. You have some AAs that can earn more than BAs. In fact, you have some college credentials, some middle skill credentials that can earn more than a BA. And that's true. But it does not remove the importance of a BA. And it does not tell you that BAs aren't important, because some of them might have a lower earnings potential than other types of jobs. This chart just tells us that we need to do a better job of counseling our students, of defining what these career pathways are, and of letting our students know exactly where they could potentially end up over time, so that they can best position themselves to hit the job market running and get the best job that's available to them. I do have a chart here, and this is from a separate report, that talks about differences in earnings potential and median earnings for students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And because we spend a little bit of time talking about Joyce's concern with DEI and making sure that we position students in the best way possible, we do know that whether you're from a low-income family or a high-income family, that some of your earnings potential seems to be directly related to that. And that has to do with where you end up, which colleges and universities you go to, what programs you pursue, and which jobs you get in the long run. So we have to do a better job of letting our students know what their options are, and making sure that we don't continue to create the very same pathways for people depending on their SES status or socioeconomic status. Here's the report I was telling you about from National Student Clearinghouse that talks about declining enrollment over time for certain locations, certain types of schools. It's a concern for all of us. I think this chart is important as well, because it tells us that higher ed in some ways is contributing to some of the disparities we observe in earnings and BA attainment. And this chart is telling us that if we use data over time on college enrollment, we find that there's a distinct relationship, causality between one's race, ethnicity, and where you end up in a more selective school or an open access school. And it has very little. Now, there's always something to do with readiness, but very little with readiness in its totality. And if you have the chance to look at this report, we are about a month away from publishing an update on this. You will be able to see how these numbers have changed over time and what's happening to the face of our open access schools and community colleges and compared to the more selective schools. We talk about the returns on investment for different schools and different universities. And we also have reports that discuss which locations have a better ROI, return on investment, depending on where you end up. This is also important. We'd love to share that in more detail when we have more time. So I'm going to sort of just let people know that we have information on a state-by-state basis on how many degrees, how many of your jobs require a BA, and how many of those jobs don't. And if you notice, DC, Washington, DC is always at the top of the food chain because there's so many government jobs in DC that are going to require BAs and above. But you can always find your state here and the Great Lakes states and try to figure out where, what percentage of your jobs are going to require BA in the future. And what I have in the subsequent slides, and I trust that these slides will be shared with the broader group, is for each of these states, some numbers here that speak to distributions of jobs by educational attainment level, and actually the number of jobs for those states. And, you can look at your state, compare it across the board, compare it to the national level, and we can discuss, what are some of the strategies that each state is using to make sure that they are preparing their workers for these jobs of the future. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. We appreciate your work so much. The resource that you did to the country is just invaluable, and we appreciate your leadership and your willingness to share today. I really echo your recommendation that people take a look at the reports and really dig into their own state, because that information is just really, really important. I'm going to see if there are any questions while I pull up my slides here. So I'm not seeing the chat, folks. So are there any questions for Nicole?
I do see one question, Debra, about where do I find my state, that Mary posted to the chat.
Great.
There, if you go to cew.georgetown.edu and you search for After Everything, we have one report that has all of the states in alphabetical order. So you can find about the 4 or 5 page discussion in your particular state and compare it to some of the national levels there.
Dr. Smith, another question. The slide that you showed about the incomes lined up against the sections of the country, northeast to the southwest, southeast, were those configured for cost of living or straight salaries?
Those are straight salaries. It does not control for differences in cost of living in each of the locations.
Okay, thank you. Somebody found their state, so that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nicole. We again, we really appreciate the information you've shared and look forward to the reports that are continuing to come. That's great. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Tim Harmon, who has been part of a research project we've been conducting with the Great Lakes states, looking at policies and strategies around baccalaureate attainment for community college students. Tim is the president of Workforce Enterprise Services, a consulting firm that's been around a number of years, and he has deep experience in both post-secondary education and workforce development organizations. Together, Tim and I have been working on this community college baccalaureate research now for a number of years, including assisting CCBA with the National Program Inventory. And Tim has also authored a new report that has very recently come out on how to use supply and demand analysis to assess the need for new baccalaureate degrees, including degrees in community. So those are exciting resources that folks may be dropping in the chat. So please watch for that as we're speaking. So I'm going to kick off this portion of the webinar by sharing with you what we've been up to. December of last year, we've been conducting a study, 7 states in the Great Lakes region, to try to understand more fully how states are thinking about baccalaureate attainment, particularly for community college students. We have included in that work the community college baccalaureate degrees, but the focus of the study is really much broader. So we'll be these broader policy issues, and I'll do that piece of the study, and Tim will then share with you what we have found is going on related to community college baccalaureates. One thing we wanted to mention is we did this same study almost 4 years ago. The beginning of the pandemic, we were talking to folks in the Great Lakes states through the summer of that year, again, looking at baccalaureate policies. So Tim in particular will be able to share some of the developments and changes that we have seen. We did this research using Zoom. We've done deeper research archives and online resources, and just a lot of conversations with folks in the Great Lakes states. So that's where the information comes from. And it's also where some great relationships have formed with the folks that you'll hear about on our panel in a little bit. So this slide shows you which states we're focusing on. The Joyce Foundation in particular looks at the Great Lakes states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. We included Missouri in this particular study because we were interested in that state's adoption of community college baccalaureate degrees a few years ago, and we wanted to understand how that's evolving. We also invited the Community College Association from Iowa to be part of our study, but we were unable to get that interview set up. So unfortunately, we have some data on Iowa that we will be sharing, but able to do an interview there. So I want to kind of, I think this slide reinforces Dr. Smith's slide when we talk about at the end of her PowerPoint, when you see that, you'll see the breakout of the states. And that helps us understand baccalaureate attainment, the types of jobs that those degrees are preparing people for. And one of the things as we talk about policy is a little bit of our state context. And it's really important to know how similar but different our states are. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of data on that. Go ahead. Oh, I thought I heard someone, sorry. Our states are really very different. Populations are different. And the population of our states, baccalaureate attainment rates are really quite different as well. So you can see in this slide, the state with the highest baccalaureate and higher degree attainment rate for 5 and older is Minnesota. That is the highest, followed by Illinois, and then drops off to Indiana at that lower end of the scale. So we have differences in our states in the population's attainment of bachelor's or higher degrees, and something to think about. This slide is comparing what I would call our higher ed infrastructure. And if you look at the chart, the bar chart on the left, it's showing you how many institutions are in each of our states, each of these Great Lakes states, by the type of institution. We vary greatly from one another. And I know that Monica Hinks will talk to us about the role of Ivy Tech, because this bar chart for Indiana showing one institution is Ivy Tech, the largest technical college system in the country. So this isn't enrollment. These are numbers of institutions that are independently accredited. That's what the Digest of Education Statistics is showing us. But you can see, look across there, you can see our states are really quite different in our composition of public and private institutions, the number of 2-year and four-year institutions varies quite a lot. The chart on the right shows you all associate and bachelor's graduates in each state. This does include the public, the private for-profit, and the private not-for-profit or nonprofit. So this is all associates and bachelor's degrees. And you can see some of this is reflected in the infrastructure of our state. So a good example, you can't see this in the bar, but in Illinois, and I am an Illinoisan, a proud citizen of Illinois, we have as many students that receive bachelor's degrees from private for-profits and mostly nonprofits than our public bachelor's degrees. So a very interesting mix, and we'll be developing, I wanted to share with you, we will be developing a brief where we will break some of these statistics out even more so that you can understand really how different our higher ed state infrastructures really are in this region of the country. This slide shows us the operating budgets of the states broken out by 2-year funds and 4-year funds for all 7 of our states. And this comes from the Grapevine study. And again, as you can see here, not only the structure of higher education, but our funding of higher education different from state to state. And again, we will be exploring some of the state context more in the brief that we're writing. So that's just a little bit of context. We could go deeper, but I'm going to leave it there and let you puzzle over what that might mean, that our states have these unique infrastructures. And I'm going to share with you 6 findings that are the major themes, we think, from our study of baccalaureate attainment in the Great Lakes states. I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to focus rather on sort of the big themes that are related to baccalaureate generally. So when we've gathered our data and interviewed our data, one of the things that's striking is that in these states, we are seeing in some states some fairly substantial structural shifts that are reshaping higher education, including in accountability, including the merger of institutions and the ways that higher education is supported by state government. Probably, I'm not going to share very much about the 4 with us today because I'm counting on our panelists to share that information. But I will share a little bit occasionally here from the states that are not speaking today. And I would point you to Wisconsin, where we're seeing fairly major shifts, including mergers of institutions in Wisconsin right now. A lot has been reported recently in Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle, even within the last few days, about and the closure of some university nonprofit institutions there. So there's some of this across the region, but Wisconsin is a state where there's a lot going on and a lot to watch. I would say then finding number 2 is that states and institutions are continue to be dedicated to addressing inequities in baccalaureate attainment. The way that happens is really quite different from state to state, partly because of our current politics and the ways that we talk about inequities and the ways that we're attempting to address them is really, in some states, getting caught up in the politics. And we heard that in our interviews. But I would also say that we are seeing efforts around reform of education, these issues around student affordability, and closing racial equity gaps are pretty pervasive. One of the initiatives I wanted to share with you is the one in Minnesota, where in that state we're seeing the development of some fairly aggressive efforts around affordability. The North Star Promise that will be starting in the fall of 2024 is definitely an initiative to keep our eyes on, and one where state leadership is attributing enrollment increases in the fall already to the promise of a fairly lucrative financial award that will be going to students in that state who qualify. The third point is around the investment in transfer and articulation. Across the board, whether colleges and states have engaged in community college baccalaureate degrees, there is continuing and dedicated interest in improving transfer. And I know that you're going to hear about this from some of our state leadership here. But I did want to point out again some of the efforts that are going on, particularly in Wisconsin with the technical college system, and the agreements that are being forged to allow their associative applied science students to transfer into public and private universities, including the Michigan Technical University in Michigan, that has an agreement with North Central Technical College in the northern part of the state. So not only within the state, but across state lines. So those developments are interesting, and you're going to hear more about those kind of developments. I think it's important to point out that we heard a lot about workforce development and the linkages and collaborations that should occur. Often we heard about these bubbling up from colleges and college leaders who are seeking the opportunity to create new programs and degrees for community college students that would create that pathway to the baccalaureate degree. So directly addressing some of the things that Nicole talked with us about earlier, about innovative approaches and partnerships, new models that are intended to improve student outcomes and student success. And again, you're going to hear about many of those very soon. And my last point is just that we do see leadership turnover. We talked to a different group of people in 2024 than we talked to in 2020, by and large, because leadership had changed. And we're in not only leadership, but institutional roles and mission. And you're going to hear a little bit about that, I know, from our colleague from Indiana. So I'm going to let her talk about some of what's happening there. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Tim Harmon.
Thanks, Debra. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the partnership that we've had to work on this important area together. And it's been a great privilege of mine to partner with you and to work with CCBA. And thank you all for your attendance at our convening today. I'm hoping this is a useful thing for all of you. And I would like to focus briefly on sort of drilling down a little bit on the community college baccalaureate in particular, where the states in our region stand on that policy innovation, and then give you a little bit of a sense of our findings when we, as Debra mentioned, this is sort of the second time we've spoken with the states in this region. And so we want to kind of do a little comparison of what we were hearing back in 2020, and then how that compares maybe to what we found most recently when we spoke with folks. And there are some broad similarities there, of course. So I'd like to start with this slide here, which gives an overview of where the states are positioned around the community college baccalaureate policy in particular. And as you can see, it's a very mixed model in the region, where we have a couple states that have really have embraced the CCB, a couple states that have not, that have maybe are in different places in terms of their interest in that, but are not at this point, have no policy, and then 2 or 3 states that are sort of have a college or two. So with respect to Michigan and Ohio, based on our most recent inventory, in Michigan, we have 5 colleges and 6 programs, 6 degree programs positioned in those 5 colleges. In Ohio, there are 14 community colleges that confer baccalaureate degrees, and those 14 community colleges were offering 25 degree programs. Now, in Ohio, that means over half of the community colleges in Ohio confer baccalaureate degree at this point. So that's been a pretty significant area of growth in Ohio in particular. Indiana has had the Vincennes University, which has been its only predominantly associate degree granting institution that also confers baccalaureates. But that one institution has 15 degree programs. So they it's an interesting model because they have just the single institution, but they have a lot of programs compared to the other states. And then in Missouri, a couple colleges, a couple programs. There, as Debra mentioned, they're a relatively recent addition to the group. Minnesota's recently authorized they have a tribal college which has partnered with the state to develop a program in education. So that's a relatively new development there as well. So that's a single institution at this point. So we see this mixed model, and we are, we've been tracking that, and there's been growth, but probably the most significant growth in terms of numbers of colleges and programs, of course, has been in Ohio. Okay, great. So looking back on sort of our major findings from this discussion that we had with the states back in 2020, so there is a recognition that the community college baccalaureate represented one of numerous approaches to expand a baccalaureate attainment. And we've often used this phrase of the sort of a suite of policy solutions. And in some states, the community college baccalaureate is in the suite. It's a member of that suite of solutions. In other states, of course, it's not. But it's just one of a number of different approaches, and some of them have been alluded to already this morning. Of course, transfer is the one that typically comes to mind. And you will hear, and I won't steal the thunder of any of our panelists, but you'll hear from some of our panelists about what's happening in their states with respect to innovations around transfer policy and making that smoother and more effective. But also things like university centers, that's happening in states in our region. Not to overlook the obvious, making a baccalaureate degree more accessible by supporting it with financial aid, targeted financial aid. We mentioned that in Minnesota and other places as well. And then policies around admission to make admission more automatic, more straightforward, more streamlined for students that have completed an associate degree to sort of smooth their transition into baccalaureate education. And that could be true whether they're in a transfer program or whether they're in other kinds of programs that aren't necessarily designed for transfer, but have benefited from articulation agreements that allow those associate of applied science degrees, say, to appreciate the benefits of baccalaureate transfer as well. And then there are other models like 3-year baccalaureate programs, 2+2 programs, et cetera, that have been mentioned. And then some states may speak to some of those things. And so that was true back in 2020, and I think it continues to be. CCB addresses multiple dimensions of college access, which is one of the reasons it's seen as a beneficial policy innovation in a number of states, because it addresses, if we think of the various barriers to the bachelor's degree attainment, academic, geographic, and financial being some of the major ones, CCB is well positioned to address those because one, it's positioned in open access institutions. Secondly, because community colleges tend to be more physically proximate to their students. And then, of course, the cost. So we see that sort of, it is a solution that approaches three of the major barriers to baccalaureate attainment. And then the CCB was seen as linking college access to completion to enable more underserved students to attain bachelor's degrees. So the stay and complete model, if you will, allows students that are particularly older students, students that are working, students that have family responsibilities, students that have to commute, students that have to attend classes at night or online. It gives them opportunities to complete a bachelor's degree that are difficult to solve through other mechanisms, whether they be transfer or university centers, et cetera. So, and then finally, we saw that CCB degrees, because they are a substantive, structural, and sort of missional alteration to the way in which baccalaureate education is done, they often faced significant legislative restrictions. Either they were sort of rationed out by being authorized on a program by program basis or an institution by institution basis, or just general resistance from traditional baccalaureate conferring institutions on the basis of missional debates, potential effects on other policy innovations like transfer, et cetera, then the partnership argument. So we saw that in 2020. And if we're going to slip to the next slide. So then kind of comparing what we were seeing in 2020 to what we saw when we spoke more recently with the states, is that there is, I would say, broad similarity. And there's, first of all, varied interest and advocacy for CCB degrees across the Great Lakes states. So in some states, and this is true really whether the state allows its colleges to confer CCB degrees or whether they don't, there's varied levels of interest and advocacy. You'll hear maybe in Illinois where it doesn't allow its colleges to confer. There's significant activity in that state around moving in that direction. But even in states like Ohio that have that, there's also been continued advocacy around the expansion of CCB degrees to areas like nursing. So we'll see. You'll see that in the work that's going on in the various states. Also, support for new models, including CCB and transfer consortia. So, for instance, like the Early Childhood Education Consortia that's been developed in Illinois, that's designed to promote transfer. It's not a CCB initiative, but it's a transfer initiative that's focused on trying to help students from community colleges transfer to and complete baccalaureate education in Illinois universities. Also, there's the nursing consortia in Michigan, and there's innovations around nursing transfer in Wisconsin, manufacturing in Ohio. So we see a range of models around improving transfer in particular that are part of the work that's occurring across the states. And then numerous efforts to address student affordability and close equity gaps. We mentioned some of those, like the Minnesota North Star model. Illinois has a higher education futures table that's convened to look at the overall question of equity of access and attainment. And they're not the only ones. There's other efforts going on as well. So we see, I would say, increased interest and efforts along that area, even though there's some controversy, of course, around equity and DEI and all, but we do see continued interest in trying to address specifically these equity gaps, primarily through student affordability as well. And then there's been persistent resistance, though, to traditional baccalaureate institutions in the threats to transfer and the ongoing relationship. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to be sensitive to in our working with the states is to understand kind of the context, both the political and sort of institutional context around what's happening in those states in terms of pursuing relationships between the 2-year and 4-year layers to make sure that they are not, causing difficulty, but also maintaining the option to pursue different options as they become available. And so we see that the states are in very different places around how to look at that, how to manage that relationship, and how to, remove the difficulties associated with competition, et cetera, between these institutional layers, and still find ways of moving forward along these policy innovations, which could include CCB, but in some cases does not or may not likely. So appreciate all of that. So I wanted to mention before I moved on that we have just today, I think, or very, very soon, the brief that Dr. Bragg has developed called Watch Them Grow, the Evolution of Community College Baccalaureate Degrees in the United States. It's a national view based on the results of our inventory, which was completed back this past December. And so that I think that will be out and should be out available very soon. I think if not already on the CCBA website. That will be available to you to give you sort of the overview of the history of what's going on with these the CCB innovation in particular, and how that's growing over time, and also gives sort of the first peek at graduation volumes, like the volumes of graduates that are coming out of these programs out. So we're getting finally to the point where we can really start looking. These people are showing up in iPads, we can see them. So it's an exciting time to be involved in this research, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you on it. Now I would like to move on to introduce Dr. Angela Kersenbrock, who's the president of the Community College Baccalaureate Association, and she will be introducing our panelists, our state level panelists. So it's been a privilege of mine to work with Angela and her staff. It's been a fantastic partnership, and Angela's been working in this area for a few years. She's developed 30 degrees and certificates and several baccalaureate programs in Florida, including business and information management, nursing, health sciences, and the lot. And she's been a leader in this area and working with multiple stakeholders to gain approval for baccalaureate programs and degrees. And in her current mission, she's focused on creating opportunity for all community college graduates to receive a baccalaureate degree in a family-sustained career area. So it's my privilege to introduce her to you and turn it over to Angela.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. I'm going to have you talk to all of my children and grandchildren.
No problem.
At all. So that would be fun. Well, Deb and Tim and panelists, CCBA is delighted to be here. And one of the reasons is that this will give us the opportunity to say that Community College Baccalaureate Association is focused on baccalaureate attainment. So it's not that we only focus on community college baccalaureate degrees. We are ecumenical in our approach. Transfer pathways, 3+1s, 2+2s, automatic admissions, the 91 degree credits, bachelor's degrees, all of those. We know that it's going to take a constellation of strategies to get all of our people across the finish line for baccalaureate attainment and economic stability. So I'm really excited about the panel that we have here with us today. And also being able to follow Dr. Smith. This is really the first time that I've heard you speak, and I was standing up cheering during most of your talk. So thank you very much for that. And Tim and Deb have done just great work. The research work is the hard part of all of this. The standing up, cheering them on is the easy part, but it's the slogging through all of the data that is really difficult. But I think today is a really special day. We're going to get to talk to the states, and we're going to do it in state alpha order because we want to hear from each of you what you're doing in your state to move baccalaureate attainment forward. So I think we'll start with Illinois. Jim and Brian, if you could talk about what Illinois is doing in that area, that would be just terrific.
Be happy to. Jim, you want me to start us?
Yes, sir.
All right. So Brian Durham, Executive Director of the Community College Board here in Illinois, and we're the coordinating board for the 48 community colleges and the system here. And I hear a lot of things have been brought up already that we're working on in Illinois and doing here in the state. I mean, I think Angela's statement is very true. It's really a constellation of strategies. And so much that's happened over the years. We've got, and we've seen an increase in dual degree programs. We're seeing greater partnerships between community colleges and universities. We've seen some growth in university centers. So really the whole spectrum. We do not have community college baccalaureate, as was mentioned, but we've focused, I'll focus on just a couple of things at the state level and then let Jim add. And kind of the center of all that we do around transfer is our Illinois Articulation Initiative, which is an initiative that's been around since the 1990s. That is a partnership of about 100 institutions in the state, and where essentially a faculty-driven process connects courses so that they transfer statewide in that universe of institutions. In the last several years, we have done a couple of things to enhance that partnership. One of those was just a few years back, but I think still really worth mentioning. Our board passed some policy that allowed community colleges to award credentials, not certificates, but credentials for essentially milestone credentials for the completion of general education core. So that students would get something on a transcript, institutions would get credit for doing it. It would help keep students enrolled and at least completing that package that would transfer. More recently in the IAI space, there has been just a year ago, there was a law passed that required the major courses to be transferable as well. So universities now have, so if it's, chemistry 200 at one place, they've got to accept that as chemistry 200 if it is in that IAI system, which again is faculty driven and has really, I think, is really getting started, that piece, but is going to enhance the ability of individuals to complete at the community college and go on and transfer. And we already have the highest, if not in the top 2 or 3, pretty consistently, community college to university completion rates for community college transfers. So as we've pushed up those numbers to get more folks in, we expect significant success there. 2 other things, and I'll let Jim comment. And these are really more in progress efforts. One of those is discussions happening literally as we speak now and ongoing in the General Assembly about the development and implementation potentially of Common Course numbering, specifically focused, at least initially, and certainly the way the legislative language is written now, around the II courses that are already vetted, already have those same learning outcomes, and ultimately would help students understand and parents understand more and better what those courses are as they transfer. And then the other thing I'll mention, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier by Emily, the state is also exploring the development of direct admissions program for community college transfer students. And so there are some direct admission programs out there, and in addition to the high school to college direct admission, but also thinking about those community college to university direct admissions pieces. And we are working through what that looks like. That's also a legislative proposal and is tied to some funding that the Board of Higher Ed actually received in Illinois from the Lumina Foundation, where we're partnering on trying to implement this approach. And we sort of envision utilizing an application aggregator, Common App, that kind of approach to doing this. But what's really exciting about it is, and certainly one of the priorities we've pushed, is that community colleges have to be prominently featured as an option and a part of the list for those high school to college students in a direct admission process. So not only are we talking, you get congratulations, you're admitted to these 3 universities, but you're also admitted to your local community college as an option here. So and really truly there is a constellation of things happening, and those are just a few of the things in Illinois. I'll let Jim add what he needs to here.
Brian,
Great.
thank you. I thought that was really interesting. That common course numbering, that strategy really lays the foundation for articulation to really make it work. So it seems like you're doing the harder stuff than the community college baccalaureate, although I know politically that's really hard, but the scaffolding that you all are doing is really impressive. So thank you.
Yep.
Jim, always happy to hear from our friend, Jim.
Great. Well, thank you for having me on. For us, it's really great to be a part of this partnership that includes Brian and his staff, ICCB, as well as our presidents. We work very closely between the president's council and the trustees. So on all the advocacy and things that Brian's talked about, we are there as a partner. We have our logos on fact sheets and things like that because, as was outlined in the Board of Higher Education strategic plan, which is called A Thriving Illinois, all of these things that we've been talking about are all part of the tapestry that really makes options for baccalaureate attainment. We have been working, thankfully, with the support of the Joyce Foundation, and really thank Emily for her leadership and support to really, this is the 3rd year of our foundation grant around the community college baccalaureate. Very closely with Dr. Bragg and with Tim Harmon, who have really done the research and really helped me really understand this work. I've only been doing this for about a little over 4 years. But I'll just say roughly, in our 3 years, what the first year was really about gathering data from NZ Burning Glass at the time, which is now Lightcast. But the second year was when we developed an advisory committee to really begin to look at this and develop our advocacy strategy. Dr. Durham was on that. Tim and Deb, of course, were part of that as well, as we started to get into our advocacy phase. And then most recently, during this legislative session, we're able to introduce legislation around the community college baccalaureate. As Deb indicated, and Brian as well, politically, that's a major climb here in Illinois. So we were able to have a subject matter hearing on it and thought it went very well and gives us something to build on. And so as we've begun to move forward, we really wanted to start to get the student voice. And so we've been able to partner with 4 different colleges all across the state to really do a survey of graduating seniors to define and really determine whether or not, if a community college baccalaureate were offered at their college, would they be more likely to seek the bachelor degree. And we found out overwhelmingly that there is not only much more support, in some cases, I think it was close to 58%, but another 18% that found it more likely. So we're going to build on that, take that to some of the policymakers, and continue our initiative as we move through the summer and into next legislative session.
Thank you, Jim. I love how intentional Illinois has been. When this finally gets over the cross line, we'll say, I think you all need to do a movie. And it would be like the journey of Illinois or something, and you could have students narrate it so that you can really see the impact. But thank you both for all the hard work that you do. We appreciate that across the country. I don't know if you really understand the impact that your efforts are having elsewhere. So congratulations on that. Thanks. Next up is Indiana. Monica, we're so glad to meet you today and to talk with you. We've been hearing a lot about what Indiana is doing, particularly with pathways and dashboards, and you and I have communicated a little bit about that. So could you talk about what Indiana is doing in terms of how you're positioning people to move ahead for more baccalaureate attainment and positioning your institutions in state?
Yeah, certainly. And good afternoon, everyone. Monica Hingst, currently serving as Acting Vice President of Student Success and Retention Strategy at Ivy Tech Community College. And I do want to just briefly share, because Debra mentioned this, Ivy Tech is the one and only community college in the state of Indiana because we are a singly accredited institution. So we have 19 campuses, about 194,000 students right now. So we are a huge force when it comes to higher education in the state of Indiana, and get to participate in a lot of exciting conversations about expanding baccalaureate degrees. So there's three really big things happening right now in the state. Some of them are programs that have been around for years, and some of them are new. Dr. Kersenbrock mentioned our transfer programs. We have quite a few transfer programs, specifically two that I'll mention. So we have a transfer singular articulation pathway program that's been around since 2013. And that includes 20 different pathways that can start in high school or at the community college setting are set up like a 2+2 program. What's different and unique about our TSAT programs is that every single public institution in the state of Indiana had to agree upon the course requirements. So they are guaranteed to transfer to any of the public institutions in Indiana. So you can come to Ivy Tech, start your first 2 years in any of those 20 programs, and then move to that companion baccalaureate program in any public institution. So we're really proud of that. Another big one that's growing hugely in the state is what we call our Indiana College Core. And that's the first 30 credits of general education that transfer as a block to any of the public institutions. And what's new this upcoming year is now every single high school in the state of Indiana is required to offer the Indiana College Core, that 30 credit block, to high school students. So every high school student in the state of Indiana now has that opportunity to get the first 30 credits out of the way before they transfer. And we're a huge provider of those ICC courses throughout the state as the Community College of Indiana. So transfer is a big thing for us. Another way that we are helping to increase baccalaureate degrees, I heard Brian mention this, we've adopted a pre-admissions program in the state of Indiana, similar to what it sounds like Illinois might be doing. So every high school student in participating high schools receives a letter in September of their senior year saying, here are all of the institutions that you could be pre-admitted to if you fill out an application and apply based on your GPA, SAT score, all of the requirements for the different institutions. And so at a minimum, every single student is getting a letter saying they've been admitted to Ivy Tech, but they're also getting a list of any institution in the state of Indiana that's participating, where they know if I fill out the application, I can go. So we're eliminating that barrier and letting every student know that they are college material, whether they maybe see themselves as such or not. And we're really excited about that. And the last big thing is we mentioned dashboards. There's a lot of really interesting dashboards that Ivy Tech internally has created to understand supply and demand using Lightcast data and aligning our programs to match. But also our K-12 partners are doing a lot of work to ensure that we're really shining a light on college and career readiness in the K-12 space. And so now there's public data for every high school where we're seeing what does college credit completion look like at every high school? What does FAFSA completion look like at every high school? And what does wage data look like for students 5 years after high school graduation? So we're getting all of that data and we're sharing that publicly, which is a big game changer for how we think about college readiness. And then I'll speak very briefly to our CCB current state. We did just pass a bill in the General Assembly that is allowing us to start to study and make recommendations for whether or not Ivy Tech Community College might award bachelor's degrees. And so that work is beginning with our Commission for Higher Education. We've actually put them in contact with CCBA and have been having conversations with them as well, so we can start to look at what are the benefits, what are the things we need to weigh, possible challenges and pain points as we pursue potentially offering CCBs in the state.
Monica, thank you so much. It sounds, what you're doing just sounds so exciting. I'm just picturing when you were talking about the letter that the high school student received saying, you know, you can be automatically admitted. I'm thinking about a student who never considered that they were going to go to college, getting that letter and what that means to a family. So, I mean, that's really tremendous work. Congratulations. Thank you. And I can't wait to talk to you more because so far in Indiana and Illinois, I think there's so much to unpack and discuss. I think it'd be really a great conversation. So thank you. So Michigan, you all have done great things. I know with your nursing consortium and other efforts for baccalaureate attainment. And Brandy, I'm so excited that you're here with us. And Dawn, oh, there's Dawn. So Dawn McMaster, president of Alpena College. So if you could both talk about what's happening in Michigan, that would be great.
Sure, I'll kick things off. So nice to be with all of you. My name is Brandy Johnson. I'm the president of the Michigan Community College Association, and we represent 31 two-year colleges in Michigan, including 28 public community colleges and 3 tribal colleges. And we work both with presidents and trustees. And so, you know, a lot has been said on transfer. I'll just mention a couple of things related to transfer. We also have a 30 credit block called the Michigan Transfer Agreement that has now become very universally provided by each of our colleges and accepted by our 4-year public and private universities. We use that to build out a series of transfer pathways that are a full transfer of a degree. So we have 10 academic disciplines that are more in some academic fields for students to complete an associate degree at a community college and have the whole degree transfer as a block, which we think needs to become the standard practice for transfer as opposed to course by course. Once those 10 academic programs were done, we then worked to do it with 4 workforce or applied programs. So for those that get an associate degree in, for example, an applied IT or healthcare or business or science, having that as a degree, which has been more challenging to get some of those more technical applied workforce related coursework transferred. It's not universally accepted by 4-year institutions, but we've at least built some pathways. And then finally, and all of this can be found at mymitransfer.org, is we have now mapped out credit equivalencies by colleges for industry recognized credentials. So you can search if you have a certification in a field, you can look up that certification and which colleges accept that as credit. The next area that I just wanted to mention quickly is how much Michigan in the last 5 years has done as it relates to college affordability policy, especially for students that attend community colleges. And we know that if you're able to make community college functionally tuition free, it obviously helps build college going culture and college enrollment. But what it also does is makes the burden of pursuing a bachelor's degree lower, knowing you don't have as nearly as much, if any, debt from your first credits. There's a lot more ability to pursue a 4-year degree if you don't have that debt. And so we have just like a series of programs starting with Futures for Frontliners for those individuals that worked in person during the pandemic, giving them a tuition-free pathway to an associate degree, followed up by Michigan Reconnect, which was for those that are 25 and older. We have a temporary expansion of that program to make it 21 and older. But the big one, and one that has, I think, a lot of implications for this topic is the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, which targets traditional age students, 18-year-olds, right out of high school, so FIDIAC type students, by providing a significant subsidy for them to pursue post-secondary education. It's up to $2,750 if you're going to community college, up to $4,000 if you're attending a private four-year, and up to $5,500 if you're attending a university. The unique dimension that we negotiated in the policy is the transfer functionality of it. So if a student straight out of high school starts at community college, they can use this scholarship for 2 to 3 years at the community college and then continue their eligibility when they transfer to a four-year institution at that higher dollar amount, which is really exciting. And then lastly, before I talk about nursing, which is maybe one of the most interesting things we've done in recent memory, is we have a brand new state department. So as some of you might know, Michigan is the most highly decentralized state for higher education in the country. We have a new state agency called the Michigan Department of Lifelong Education Advancement and Potential, or MyLeap. I will say that even with the creation of MyLeap, we are still the most decentralized state in the country as it relates to governance of higher ed. MyLeap doesn't have any authorities that would change how our colleges are governed. But for the first time, we have a state partner that's really playing, I think, a significant role in the policy landscape of higher education in Michigan. And one of the areas we've really encouraged MyLeap to lean into is transfer. To take a leadership role. It puts community colleges in a really tough position, if I'm being honest, like begging universities to accept our credits and our students, and negotiating all of those agreements one by one by one by one. By having the state take over some of the responsibilities and frankly calling out our four-year friends for their willingness or unwillingness to accept credits, I think will make a big difference. And relatedly, one of the we have a series of recommendations. As the department was stood up, we gave them a to-do list on their first day. We said, here are all the things that this new state department should work on day one, including a series of recommendations related to transfer. One of them is to provide incentives to allow more students to get baccalaureate degrees on community colleges campuses, still conferred by four-year universities, but using the facilities and the infrastructure, particularly in rural communities, to earn bachelor's degrees. And this idea was sparked out of probably, I mean, Don, you were around longer for it than me, but like a 15-year all-out war between two-year colleges and four-year colleges about the ability to confer baccalaureate degrees in nursing, the BSN. Michigan has a very narrow community college baccalaureate policy that allows our community colleges to confer degrees in four very specialized fields, including maritime technology, cement technology, energy production, and culinary arts. So those are the only 4 disciplines by which community colleges can confer baccalaureate. And for years and years and years, legislatively, we tried to get a statute change to allow nursing to be added in the fifth discipline, and universities fought us tooth and nail. And so right when I started in this position, only just about 2.5 years ago, it was about as ugly as we had seen it. Just really all out warfare at our state capitol in state Lansing, and it got really ugly. And so I called a timeout and sat down with my counterparts from the four-year to say, is there a different way? Is there a compromise? And over the course of not very long, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, we reached a compromise that looks like this, and we think it could be a model to do with other disciplines. What it would do is allow community colleges to be in the driver's seat for creating a BSN transfer program with a university. The analogy I always used is, this is not the prom, it's the Sadie Hawkins dance, where the girl asks the guy to the prom. Too often community colleges were the ladies in high school waiting for someone to ask them to prom, waiting to sign a transfer agreement by one of our big universities, but this kind of flips it on its head. the universities had to court the community colleges to be their BSN partner. And what that meant is that the university needed to deliver the coursework for BSN transfer students, so ADN to BSN students, right on the campus, using the facilities, and oftentimes using the faculty of the community college, using those professors to teach those bachelor's classes. But the bottom line was that our students didn't need to travel across the state. And Alpena, Don will talk in a moment, but Alpena is the most perfect example of this, where there's not a university anywhere nearby, that they shouldn't have to leave if they want to get an in-person BSN experience and degree. And by the way, those local employers hire the ADNs, and so they're doing the BSN while working as nurses, which is such a shortage right in their local communities. And for our troubles, community colleges were awarded $56 million to take on this work of being courted by universities to be their BSN partner. So with that, I think I'd like to Debra and Angela, if it's okay, to turn it over to President McMaster. He's the president of Alpena Community College, a very rural community college. And I'm proud to say the very first college to set up this unique ADN to BSN partnership.
Thank you, Brandy, and we appreciate everything you've done. It sounds like you've taken your time, not made a lot of waves. Well, the opposite of that, I think, is true, but thank you. Don, we're anxious to hear about Alpena. Brandy's spoken very highly of what you all have done.
Well, thank you all, and thank you Brandy, and thank everyone. I appreciate the opportunity. Alpena Community College is remote, and we're in a rural area. We're on the 45th parallel on Lake Huron. So we're 2.5 hours from the nearest university. Fine school. If you're looking at completion in Michigan, we're at the top the last 3 years. So we have a mix of transfer. We do a lot of dual enrollment, early middle college, and we have some occupational programs that are unique. Brandy captured it perfectly, maybe even understated the battle that we had on the community college baccalaureate. We got the 4 approved in 2013. So we had a 10-year battle really over nursing. And, it got rough. Community colleges are very decentralized in this state. And, we capture millage in our certain tax district. So the opposition became, okay, if you want to get a BSN, you're going to be a university and you're going to have to forego your millage. That was the poison pill. So for us, that's 20% of our revenue, but for many other schools, it's quite a bit more. So that was a tough battle, and I think Brandy captured it well. We wanted to just be able to offer a BSN in Alpena for working nurses who needed a BSN. Their employer told them they needed a BSN for the system to attain magnet status. So COVID thwarted that a little bit, changed it a little bit, but fact is that getting a BSN was extremely hard for people in our community. So we wanted, to be a responsive community college and provide that. And so we had to compromise. I can't recall who brought that up when we talked in our prep webinar, but compromise is a good thing. And that is generally how things get done. And it's worked well. So we have probably a dozen to 15 students who are now in this BSN program, who are in our community and are taking classes from a 4-year university on our campus. So this is a good thing, and it may create a pathway for more collaboratives of that nature. I'm not sure. Clearly the enrollment, whoever brought up the enrollment data, it's real. Enrollment in our state at many community colleges is tough, and at many of the public universities, if you take out University of Michigan and Michigan State, they are really hungry for students. So if they have a BS, or if they have, say, a BSN, they're not inclined to provide an opportunity for people to get it in some other way. And that factors into other programs as well. So on the ground, it's part of a challenging environment, but it is, I think what you've described here in this webinar is the way forward. So I appreciate it.
John, thank you. You know, those opportunities to get that BSN makes a huge difference to that student, their family, the community, the hospital that they're in, the patients. You know, those have really dramatic ripple effects. And you know, what you're doing is someone might say, well, it's only 15. Well, that only 15 probably impacts, you know, several thousand. So thank you for that. And, you know, so many other people could have just thrown in the towel and given up, and you all have found a way through this. And it doesn't mean that this is the last story for Michigan with community college baccalaureates. It's just a not yet or not now. So congratulations on keeping moving forward. That often is the hardest thing to do. So
thank you.
We're excited to have Ohio in the house today. And we've got Cynthia Spires and Rick Woodfield and who else? Oh, and Kelly Gray. So thank you all. So can you, Ohio folks, can you all talk a little bit about what you all are doing? I know you've been pretty busy. So who wants to start that discussion?
Get started. Quickly turn it over. We're just having a great time with our CCBA success over the last few years. Our first degrees were approved in 2018, so we're relatively new at the game, but been doing a wonderful job of really expanding that option to a lot of our institutions in a lot of different areas. So we first got started off. All of the movement has been very industry focus. So as we work with our employers around the state where that need is being unmet by the other institutions around the state, and you saw the graphs earlier, we have a lot of private institutions providing higher education in Ohio. We have a lot of state universities with many branch campuses. Several are co-located with community colleges, as my two colleagues on this call can talk about. So not always providing all the opportunity that we needed. And I think that part of where we got real movement with our legislator was our bringing in the employers and making sure business and industry voice was being well heard and what their needs were and what their needs weren't, or they weren't being met. All really critical to our success in the CCBA movement. But we started off with advanced manufacturing being really key in a number of our institutions regionally where the universities didn't have local sites that were providing that opportunity. So we can talk about that. Kelly Gray's institution was one of the early ones in advanced manufacturing. We also have programs in IT, addiction services, baccalaureate degree in that is fairly new. And then IT, I think in aerospace, we have one in that area, in the technician area. And then most recently was in our nursing, and Dr. Spears can talk a little bit about how that really gained a foothold. Not only was her institution able to do the ADN to BSN, but they were able to do the pre-licensure BSN. So Dr. Spears, you want to talk a little bit about what we've done with nursing over the last 2 years?
I'm going to go back to what Brandy said. It was a real fight. And if I didn't have thick skin, some of one of the requirements is that once we put our proposals out there, then the universities, as part of the requirement, would give feedback online for everybody to see it. And it was pretty tough. But, you know, we were able in 2 years to get 2 legislative changes. And our intentionality is exactly what Rick said. We started out with gathering data. Deb, I know you'll like that. But we gathered data from the Ohio Nursing Association, from our local industry and regional industry. We collected data from students. I mean, we just had a lot of data because in Ohio, you have to meet certain criteria. And when we first applied for the BSN, we knew that right now we only have applied degrees that were allowed in Ohio, but we thought we're going to push the envelope, put one out there and see what kind of response we get. It was immediately, no, you can't do it, because it wasn't an applied degree. And so in 2019, we started putting together a proposal in-house while I hired a lobbyist, and we just happened to have the president of the Senate living in our area, as well as the House Speaker. And my job was to have lunches and talk about what we needed and why we needed it. And a lot of phone calls behind the scenes. The Chancellor, Rick Kelly, you know, was not for this. And we had to get legislation involved. And so they actually held meetings in Lima, Ohio, where our college is located, with the Chancellor, 10 CEOs of the hospitals in our region, multiple senators, House of Representatives who wrote letters back, and it was our intentionality became legislation and industry. And the governor actually got involved at one point and said, you pass it through or you're out. And that was kind of an interesting thing that happened. So we got it passed in the first, and I think there were 3 of us that started. Kelly, you were one of them at North Central. We were one in Washington State, and we got the RN to BSN. Well, we were the only ones who applied for the pre-licensure, and we were told no. So again, went back and started having all these meetings again. And I will tell you that there is nothing better than building those relationships with legislators early on and telling them why it's needed in their area. So one of the key pieces was that the chancellor said, well, but you offer a lot of these at local universities. And the hospital said, but they don't stay. So we are in really need of these BSN. We also want magnet status. And so that got the ear of the regional legislators. And so we were able then to take forward the pre-licensure. It finally got approved at the state. We took it to the Higher Learning Commission. They have approved it. And now it's sitting with ASIN, and the High Board of Nursing is involved, and they're okay. So we're waiting on ASIN and National to come back and do a site visit with us. It's not through yet, but so far along the way, it's been very, very positive. And when I tell you to set up really great relationships with legislators, our key senator got it in there with our lobbyist, with the governor. And right now, and I say right now because I think it opened a door to say that Rhodes State College would be able to walk through on the pre-licensure. But I'm very competitive. Angela knows that, and Rick does too. And I think that it just opened a door for a pre-licensure BSN. Ours is a 3-year accelerated, but that includes summers. So it's not that it's shortened semesters. It's still the same number of credits, but it's offered over a 3-year period. And that was done in collaboration with the hospitals who wanted more students out quicker with the BSN. And so we're trying to get that one passed through the national accrediting body. We have 35 right now enrolled in the RN to BSN, and we're prepping up for fall. And so that will add more to the local industry because all of our students are local. When we opened up our applications, we only allowed students who are either already working in our local regional hospitals or someone who lived in the area, because that's what we said in our proposal. We didn't want people from California and everywhere else coming because we were low cost. We wanted to service our industry, and I think that tipped the scale. Kelly, you've got the BSN talk to, so why don't you add to that?
I would definitely agree with what Cynthia said. It's about building those relationships and knowing your data, but more importantly, knowing the communities that you serve and the needs that they have from a workforce and student need. And so I think arguing that point was the competitiveness, not just wanting to win it, but to know that it was in the best interest of your students and your communities. And so again, in Ohio, we all had the opportunity for our students to go on for a bachelor's degree in nursing. It wasn't that there weren't programs out there, but what we were seeing in our local regions is that students were not doing it. And so students that went to 4 years did not stay in our community. So if they came to us for that degree, then they went back home. And so we were not filling the need in the community. And we could document that. We could look at, all the graduates and where they lived and where they stayed and were employed afterwards. And so we had a big hole in our regions as far as accessibility to employment in our area, not just getting the degree. So it was a lot different argument related to the bachelor's degree in nursing than it was for the initial degrees. So as Rick mentioned, our college was one of the first ones that received the or the bachelor's in applied science, and ours was in mechanical engineering technology. And so in 2018, that was passed. And we started our program in 21 for the engineering, and we're looking at graduating our 60th student this year. So our target was 25% of our graduating associate degree class would continue on to do that. And we've really met that target. That's also been our focus target initially for our bachelor's degree in nursing. And we started last fall and are on target, hopefully to graduate our first graduate this summer. So it came in with a lot of general education credits in addition to her associate's degree. But again, our focus and target for recruitment is our local students who've completed their associate degree with us. So we've attracted a couple who've moved into the area, but for the most part, they are former graduates who did not go on. So there is some degree of barrier for a lot of our rural students. Just the fear, can I be successful at a 4-year, and the support that they develop while they're there at your program makes a difference. And so they're more likely to attempt the unknown because they know whether it's online or in person for that BSN, they have the local support and they can always come in and not only get support for the courses, but we also have those support services that are available to them. So I would just encourage Michigan. It's not necessarily over. It's great that you have a compromise to meet the needs of your students, but just again, don't be afraid to look at what your data says and what your individual needs are.
One thing I would like to add to Angela is that in Ohio, because we were talking about affordability, and in Ohio, our dual enrollment program is growing and growing and growing. We alone have over 2,000 students in what we call College Credit Plus. So that cost for them for the first 2 years is free for the students. And, it was like in 2023, there was 163 million in tuition costs that were supported for families. And so that's a lot of reduced costs for students because they have the first 2 years done if they take that many, but we have a lot more that are graduating with a 2-year degree and then going on. So that cost has really helped. And we actually went out with donors and started really pushing for students who wanted to go get a bachelor's degree. And it wasn't just when we had ours, we didn't have the BSN yet. So we were working with donors to say, hey, if we get these students through these programs, we want them to get a BSN because the hospitals were saying, we need it, we need it, we need it. And so we were willing to help the industry. Once we got it, that same donor and several others are now donating money for scholarships for students who are going to complete our bachelor's degree. So there are other things to do, you know, with your community and people that are willing to support that will help reduce the cost the traditional way, Angela, and then there is the non-traditional way. Get a donor even to transfer if you want to go to another institution. So
I just wanted to add, we have a couple other institutions that are more urban in Ohio that have used the tack that community colleges, especially in the nursing programs, attract a much more diverse student body. And wanting those students to graduate and then move on to a baccalaureate degree and stay in their community so that their practitioners look like their community, right? And more representative of the patients that they have coming in has been well documented in healthcare outcomes, and therefore is an important element as well. So that was very useful in the argument for Cincinnati State, and Ohio State University's hospital itself came out in support of the community college in Columbus State for their BSN program. So because they needed more students from Columbus going through that program and becoming practitioners.
Well, I'm blown away, Deb and Tim. This is like a master class in baccalaureate attainment. I mean, just unbelievable. You've covered the waterfront here. I'm just so impressed with everything. You've talked about gathering the student voice, which is so important. Jim, you talked about that, and the overwhelming positive response of students to staying in their communities and staying and completing. I think that is really important. Cynthia, you talked about industry, and well, everybody really spoke about industry, how important it is to have industry as a real partner, a strategic partner in not just getting community college baccalaureates, but in pursuing smoothing out transfer pathways. That is so important. Cynthia, I love that you hired your own lobbyist. I don't know what that's about.
Now, yes, I was told if you're going to go to this fight, go back to Brandy, if you're going into this fight, you need someone who knows everybody at the State House who's going to fight with you. And that is probably one of the best things that we did for us, and particularly even with the pre-licensure, because he even read our proposals and said, you need to say it this way because, and he named certain senators will like it better that way. And so the whole legislative piece was so impactful.
That tells me that your board of trustees was really behind this movement, that you had the funds to hire a lobbyist. I've heard of systems, hiring a lobbyist, but not an individual community college. I think that's just really terrific. Well, thank you all for sharing those. And we're opening it up now to our participants or our audience. If you have questions, you want to put it in the chat, that would be great. We'll make sure that we capture all of those. And I have about 100 questions to ask also. So we're definitely going to use the time. So while we wait for somebody, and please don't be shy, to put something in the chat, did your states start with having baccalaureate attainment goals? And then you worked from that, or did the impetus for the changes that you put in, did that come from you? Monica, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So our state follows our Lumina goal of 60% residents earning some sort of credential by 2025. We don't have a set baccalaureate attainment goal. However, that work really guides a lot of what we do, and is the impetus for some of our efforts to explore community college baccalaureates. So we in the state of Indiana have 2 million adults that do not have a college credential. And when we look at our full-time four-year degree population, only about 10% of those are adults, and many of them are actually leaving the state. So we've got about 2/3 that stay in the state once they earn their bachelor's degree. So the hope, and this was mentioned by Emily when she was talking about CCB students, many of these students are place-based students. And so the hope is, with our presence in every county in the state of Indiana and our 19 campuses, 42 sites total, having an opportunity in your backyard could help many of these adult students who are interested or curious about earning a bachelor's degree, but unable to do so.
Thank you. Illinois, what do you all have state goals for baccalaureate attainment?
Well, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just gonna say, we've got that similar 60% by 2025, but it doesn't really get followed. And in some ways it's sort of been pushed aside, but I'll defer to Brian on this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that through the strategic plan that has most recently been done, there's really been a shift. I don't want to say we've shifted away from completion, because that's not true. Well, but we've shifted towards equity at the center of the completion conversation. And so it's as much about getting graduates as it is about closing the equity gaps across the various groups of individuals that have been underserved or need more supports or what have you. And much of the planning, much of the work of the system, and I include really all of our partner agencies here, has focused around how we can more intentionally get at equity gaps. One quick example: we are requiring all institutions, from public universities and public community colleges, to submit equity plans where they're going to address how they are working to close equity gaps across a variety of pieces of their operations and instruction, et cetera, et cetera. So really, that's the main push.
Ohio, so other states, Michigan, were you working on a baccalaureate attainment goal, or?
We have a 60 by 30 goal, like all the other states. And the truth is that we have some very good labor market data that's coordinated through the Michigan Center for, I don't remember the acronym names, but our Bureau of Labor Market Information recently changed its name. And every other year they post the 50 hottest jobs in Michigan, jobs that are high growth, high wage, high demand in every region of the state. And increasingly, those jobs are for those with bachelor's degrees, period. So there is just no, I am the first to push back on anyone that says the bachelor's degree is not necessary, that you should stop at community college education for a whole bunch of jobs. That is not the reality. But starting at a community college is a really, really smart strategy for students that ultimately want to attain a bachelor's degree. I think right now 34 out of the 50 hot jobs require a bachelor's degree or higher.
And that mirrors what Nicole's data showed as well from George Washington. There's a question on the chat. Thank you, Brandy. And let's see. I think Elizabeth is asking the dangerous question. Elizabeth Meza, are BSN degrees the gateway to increase presence of CCB degrees in other areas? Would panelists recommend starting with the BSN, and to what extent?
Rick.
Elizabeth.
You want to play poker with me, because I can't. That's a tough start.
Yes.
Because
No,
all of your universities have a lot, and a lot of your private institutions have a lot of stake there. So it seems like really finding where the dearth of production is might be a best place to start, and align that with high demand, high wage, that kind of initiative seems to be probably a better place to start. But don't
I
shy
would
away from
definitely
it.
agree with that comment, Rick. I think the Bachelor of Science in Nursing is definitely probably a dangerous one, but it was industry driven. And so what is your industry driving in your area? So is it something related to manufacturing, biotechnology? You have to know what your demand is, and I think that's your gateway, because you're going to have the strongest support. Your industry is going to push your legislators. So I think that's definitely where you look.
And I agree with that. It was tough, but that was probably the greatest need in our region anyway. And by getting the BSN, I think the door that it opens is other bachelor's degrees. For us, allied health and nursing are huge in this area. And so we've got respiratory that we could move into easily, well, not easily, but I mean, from a curriculum standpoint, radiology. So there are other baccalaureate degrees in science that I think the BSN will open up the door for, because it's already now, the legislators approved the first one. But I agree that you might want to start somewhere else first, and then go after the industry to say, come on, let's go. Yeah.
Kelly, I thought you had oh, I'm sorry, Don.
Oh, I was just going to add I would agree with that. The argument you hear with the BSN is from people who are opposed to it is, community colleges ought to stay in their lane, and the line of distinction between universities and community colleges gets blurred, and it's a struggle, and when funding is distributed, and, that's the legislative argument against it. So if your intent is to try and increase the number of community college baccalaureates, you might as well start right in the hot area first. That's my take.
Well, so lots of different opinions. Kelly, I like the way you framed it, that you should start where your community and industry has the greatest need. I think that is wise, but also in the background, I think we should be playing that song from Disney's Brave. How do you that song, the girl is singing Brave, be brave. Because I think when you do the BSN, you need to be certainly thick-skinned. And one of the things I just want to point out is that was when I was at Seminole, that was the real struggle area, was the BSN. That was the one that we fought over for, I think, 10 years. And it came down to when the universities are doing the generic program, those are very, very, very expensive programs, probably one of the most expensive on their campus. The way they recoup some of those costs is through the RN to BSN, which is very inexpensive to do. And so universities feel like if you take my RN to BSN, I'm going to lose a whole lot of money to my College of Nursing. And so I think that is, in addition to it being, once you get your foot in the door, I think that is another reason why this is such a difficult strategy to BSN. So,
to that point, Angela, I think we need to look at the data to see if we are having impact on those university enrollments.
yes.
Because I believe, I don't have the data yet, that we're going after different audiences.
Absolutely.
So, I think that's going to be an important piece of data to bring forward.
I think it's going to be a very long time before we ever meet the demand for nurses, and there is plenty of space for everybody out there to offer a nursing degree, whether it's the associates or the bachelor's or a graduate degree. And again, I think our focus as a community college is to serve our community. And so it isn't about just competing with the next school. We all like to win and have the next degree, but our focus and our mission is on serving our community. And so knowing what your community need is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it's always wise that we can't ignore the politics or the money of situations. So, I mean, it makes it hard. So I want to ask you, you've all been putting in so many strategies and so many activities. Oh, and there's a question too on moving the baccalaureate needles. What metrics are you using? Are you seeing impact yet? Or is it too soon? I know, Brandy, you've put a lot of work into streamlining and straightening out some of those pathways. Are you seeing the effects of your good work yet, or what are you thinking?
Certainly on the transfer, like the broad transfer work that we talked about. Michigan is, I never get to say this, but Michigan is a top 10 state in successful transfer of our community college students. A higher percentage of our students actually do matriculate to four-year institutions, or we're in the top 10 states, which is really exciting. So certainly on the transfer work and on the affordability work, I think on this specific nursing play, it's way too early to tell, but we have seen success in the number of these agreements that were signed. So each of the colleges are having signing ceremonies between the president of the four-year public or private, and colleges can choose private or public colleges. It's really the one that will give them and their students kind of the best deal. They sign these, and so like those agreements being signed is like an immediate deliverable that we have been able to demonstrate. But I think that sort of plays out in more qualitative ways in terms of the relationships. So President McMaster signed his agreement with Saginaw Valley State University, and I think one, it inspired other colleges to give a look at Saginaw Valley State University, basically to say, oh, if Don endorsed them, we should maybe look at them too. But I think it's helped deepen the relationship with SVSU, which I think will prove fruitful as in transfer conversations and other disciplines.
So the unintended consequences, the unintended benefits are going to be hard for you to capture, but they're certainly there, and I think important that we all keep an eye on those as well. How about others? Have you seen, Illinois, have you seen impact yet in what you all have been doing with kind of a common course numbering system and your Common Core? Are you starting to see impact with those strategies, Jim and Brian?
I had a lot to say while I was on mute there. So I would say that some of those things are pretty new. You know, common course numbering, direct admissions, those conversations. We also are in the high numbers on transfer rates, and we certainly have great completion when students get there. But two things. One is understanding what's happening across 1,000 articulation agreements is a challenge for all of us. And I think that from a state perspective, it's probably one of the most difficult things to get a handle on. I think a lot is going on that we don't realize or recognize, even when you have a good sense of what's going on, or you believe you do. And I think that some of the data can be a little murky to understand, because transfer is just inherently, every transfer student is a story, right? And kind of understanding that can be difficult. But we've got good data. I mean, the one thing that I will say, the Gen Ed credential that I named from a few years ago, and we've seen a significant uptake in that piece in particular, and seen a lot of students that have taken advantage of that. Seen a lot of growth across the community colleges in making sure students stay and finish that package and not transfer out sooner. So, you know, some of the things we've got a ways to go yet, I think.
Jim, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not on this particular issue. I mean, one thing I was just going to add that we've been talking about was the Promise program a little bit. And, you know, Illinois has really tried to, you know, we've been approached by Department of Ed about a Promise program. And so really it's through the MAP dollars that have been increased. And the governor's done a phenomenal job of increasing MAP to the point where whenever we're approached about it, it's the combination of MAP plus Pell that has really created a Promise program here in Illinois. So just that in terms of the affordability side, that's sort of the way that we've approached it here in Illinois.
Great. And I'm really happy that you brought up that word affordability. I think every time I'm tying that to what Nicole was talking about with college might not be for, you know, whomever, that every time there's a headline talking about explosive student debt, that I think that convinces another student not to go on. And that coupled with people who shouldn't be saying this, saying, well, college isn't for everybody, you know, you can do some other things. I think those two things are so dangerous, it makes me crazy, because it's harmful to the country and to all of our families. So I know that several of you are doing things with affordability. And so Illinois has spoken about that. Michigan and Ohio, do you have some things in Indiana to talk about with affordability also? If you shake your head, I'll call you. Oh, Monica, you were just shaking your head.
I am, and then did you notice I stopped? Uh,
Sorry.
So, you know, a big focus of Indiana is we as a state are really trying to embrace this idea of blurring the lines between high school, college, and career. And by doing that, we're exposing high school students to dual credit courses for free because they're taking it in high school, or at a reduced cost if they're taking it through dual enrollment on our campuses. That allows them to transfer, whether that's to us as the community college or a 4-year, a leg ahead of everybody. And so that's a big focus. With just Ivy Tech alone, which I realize we are most of the community college and dual credit offerings, we have 91,000 high school students taking courses with us. And we're saving millions for families a year. So it's a big point of pride, and it really does make a difference for the cost of higher education with students. So that's a big one that we're looking at and continuing to grow as we continue to put policies in place so that every single high school is offering equitable numbers of courses and these credentials that package themselves and transfer.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to the affordability discussion?
We are seeing some changes related to consortial agreements with private independents in which they are matching our tuition rate for our students to be able to transfer on. And that's relatively new in the last few years because the competition is harder for them. So they want to attract students to go on, and it gives our students a lot more opportunity for accessibility. They aren't limited to certain schools in especially areas like liberal arts where they want to go on. And I think that that's a great incentive that's relatively new.
Kelly, thank you. Dawn, did you have something?
I do. I would commend Brandy's work. In our state, we have something called Reconnect, which has been a pretty transformational program to encourage. We're talking about baccalaureate attainment, you know, on the back end, you know, exiting community colleges to go to the university or providing them ourselves. But Reconnect is really about expanding the pipeline of access on the front end to community colleges. That's a key piece as well, as if you get more people who somehow exited the system unsuccessfully back into it and give them supports. There's a lot of good work to be done there, and the state has invested significantly in that. I will tell you, to your idea, your point, I was at a conference, a Phi Theta Kappa conference in Orlando a couple weeks back, and somebody was giving a presentation. They were saying their data showed that community colleges have a stigma issue. That is, everyone loves community colleges, but they don't want their own kid to go there. And I thought, you know, there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunately. So there's this issue is not in isolation from all the other issues that lead people to make that errant conclusion.
That's really important. That's one of, I guess that's another battle that we face, huh? That
On the affordability, the only thing I'll just add is like making myself available. Like this is a topic I feel incredibly passionate about. Before I was in this position, I was Governor Whitmer's education policy advisor, where we structured so many of these new financial aid programs. And then before that, I was the executive director of the Michigan College Access Network that focuses a great deal on affordability policy advocacy. So I've just sort of consulted with a bunch of other states that are looking to make new investments in affordability, and talked about, the politics of it all and the design, financial aid design, which is a really hot, because the design of your financial aid programs make a huge difference in enrollment patterns. And so if anyone wants to talk offline and go real deep and nerd out on financial aid policy design and public policy advocacy, I am here for it.
I'm writing her name down. So if you need her name next month when you're thinking about this, call me, because I've got it. So thank you. Well, we're someone who's giving us the 15-minute hello, but I wanted to ask Deb. Deb, we've got this great panel of people, and I know you must have some questions you want to ask. So is there something you have in mind?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm feeling overwhelmed and really so pleased with all of the information that you shared. I think just like Angela said when she started this, when we tap into the expertise and the energy and the diversity of higher education across our Great Lakes region, there's just so much here, kind of a microcosm of what's happening around the country. But it's been wonderful to hear you all talk about some of these ideas and how they actually play out and goals that some of them require. I don't really think I have any questions. I'm happy to see us wrap up a little early if Angela wants to do that, but I'm also open to playing my part.
One more question.
Hearing more.
One more question, okay, and then I'll stop. But this credential thing, where people are getting credentials, non-degree credentialing or certificates, we've talked a little bit about that during our prep on this, but some of you are thinking about laddering credentials into the baccalaureate degree. So when I hear that, it makes my heart happy. So is there somebody who wants to talk about that? That would be great.
Certainly can jump in there on that. Ohio has, as you know, a lot of excitement around the semiconductor industry moving into Ohio, and that has just elevated our sense of urgency around workforce development and needing to. We're going with, we need to 4x the number of graduates completers that we have, but the real number is like 8x. So we're way behind on those skill sets. And we know that to get more females and underrepresented populations involved in that curriculum, we have a math issue to address. So all of that we're trying to meet head on using the iVest model approach. So you don't need to have a college level math to get that entry level certificate. We're embedding math into that curriculum, and now we're really building in the co-requisite supports that need to be built into those courses to really assure we have the completion numbers of the students that we attract. And that whole goal is to then build confidence in those students in that applied mathematics format to believe that they can do the next level, college level math, move on to the associate degree and the baccalaureate degree from there.
Great. Rick, you said the two magic words, right? Credentials and math. So Jim, do you have something else you want to add to the credential discussion?
I'm going to use my lifeline and give it to Dr. Durham.
Okay, Brian.
Well, what I will say is, we have real interest in utilizing, and colleges do this, and certainly trying to figure this out, connecting non-degree credentials to credit credentials. And really, and particularly if you think about career and technical education, how much you have some of this stuff already built in already, you know, industry recognized credentials and all this. And ultimately, it's about overcoming seat time requirements and moving to competency-based type models and being able to integrate that stuff. But I will say that one of the really exciting things is in this last budget, we didn't get a lot of money, but we did get about $3 million to utilize on non-credit type instruction. Need a better name for it. I will say that for sure. But it's exciting. It has probably been since the early 90s that we had any dedicated funding specifically for this type of instruction. And so we intend to leverage that to look closer at how we can better connect these credentials to credit programs.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation that I'm hoping that we will continue. You all have really given a master class in all of this, and I mean your knowledge and experience and your courage to tackle some of these infrastructure challenges is really noticed and appreciated by so many people. So we just salute you and thank you so much. If I don't say the next thing, Shelley will like pull the plug on my computer, but I hope to see all of you in Austin, February, and I'll probably get this wrong, 4th, 5th, and 6th. And I'm thinking that we could really continue this discussion to talk about, you know, people have asked us several times, you know, are you going to expand to talk about other strategies of baccalaureate attainment? And I think you all would just be, you know, perfect for that. So, you know, we'll think about that and get back with everybody. You've done a great job. I know how busy you are. Everybody except Cynthia. I know Cynthia is looking for things to do, as is Brandy as well. But thank you all for your time. We really appreciate it. And Emily, if you're still here, the impact that your foundation makes is just incredible. I don't know if you knew, Joyce was the first foundation to support CCBA. The first people that we told our story to, and he actually said, well, we'll help you with that. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I don't think that we would be here today if it hadn't been for what you saw as the possibilities. So thank you. And yes, Samir and his new baby, we thank him too. So thank each and every one of you. Deb, it's always a pleasure to partner with you and with Tim. I learn from you every day. And this has just been great. Shelley will also be sending all of you all of these resources that we've got for you. And so just thank you all. Keep doing your great work. If we can help in any way, call on us and, you know, we'll be right there with you. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.